So I chose to do my project on glyphosate and what effects that has on human health. Glyphosate is an herbicide that's been widely used since the 1970s by commercial agricultural practices. It is the active ingredient in the product known as Roundup. What this does when it's sprayed on plants is it targets the broadleaf plants, like the nuisance weeds that tend to take over the field. So spraying this over the crops aren't affected because it doesn't really target them. Some of them have been engineered to be glyphosate resistant, but it will act on those broadleaf plants like the weeds and inhibit their protein synthesis by acting on acid pathways and disabling the enzymes necessary for them to be able to feed themselves. So then those weeds will wither up and dry. Um, and all of that. The Environmental Protection Agency regards the organophosphorus compound as safe when used according to compliance guidelines, and it does adhere as far as being environmentally safe. It does adhere is within the parameters. It doesn't disrupt wildlife, and it is considered more safe than some of the other options out there. But I got really curious about what effects does that have on human health because I've seen a lot of research. Um, about this. So I started doing research of my own, and I had heard that it's bad for the gut flora, it's bad for humans, all those sorts of things. But I was really surprised. I found two very interesting studies that I'm going to share with you today that really I hadn't heard of these before, and I was really surprised. So there were a lot of reports of agriculture workers, workers within that industry having issues with pregnancies, miscarriages, congenital defects when they were able to carry to term. So one study looked at the effect of glyphosate on human placental cells. Um, to see what kind of effect does that have on mom and baby while they're trying, while the baby's growing. So the cells were prepared and exposed to various concentrations of both glyphosate and Roundup. Glyphosate by itself, and then Roundup. Roundup has a bunch of other additives in it to give glyphosate a longer shelf life. So it kind of stabilizes it because glyphosate, as it is, doesn't have a very stable shelf life. It doesn't have a very long shelf life. So what that was, that just stabilizes it and lets it last a little bit longer. So they prepared these human placental cells and they exposed them to various concentrations of glyphosate by itself and Roundup as a whole. Glyphosate, shockingly, proved to be toxic in concentrations much lower than what the EPA considered as safe. And when they looked at the cells that had been exposed to the Roundup, they found that the damage to the cell had increased substantially. So those that were just soaked in the glyphosate for about 18 hours inhibited hormone production like estrogen, which is very important in a placental cell for it to be able to function. Exposure also inhibited enzyme activity, which is the same thing that makes it an effective herbicide. It does the same thing to the plants. It acted on the cytochrome pathways, which we will talk about those later. But when it was exposed to Roundup, the whole Roundup as the whole product, it affected a secondary enzyme pathway as well, reductase. So the fact that it can disrupt the hormones and the enzymes suggests that glyphosate can be a potentially deadly endocrine disruptor if you're overexposed to it. And then, so that was very interesting to me to find out that it could be an endocrine disruptor. And then the second study that I looked at followed people with mineral deficiencies and kind of traced it all back to a diet on commercially grown produce. They're a big source or the only source of produce, fresh fruits and vegetables that they have come from commercially grown places, which is most of us unless you shop at the farmer's market. So they started observing the nutrient content of the plants that had been grown in those large-scale agricultural fields. Um, So what they found, they got really curious about why, some organic stuff that wasn't treated with herbicide grown in the same region was pretty nutrient dense. So they didn't really think it was a problem with the soil itself. So they went in to study what this large scale agriculture place was doing. And what they found was that glyphosate has a half-life when it's exposed to the soil. That's what makes it so eco-friendly, is the fact that it can't run off, it doesn't disrupt wildlife and things like that. But what does it do to the soil? Crops are typically sprayed because putting it in the soil wouldn't be very effective. So they found that glyphosate binds to metal ions in the soil and makes it exceedingly difficult for plants to pick up micronutrients such as minerals, especially those plants that were engineered to be glyphosate resistant. So I thought that was also really interesting. So not only are we disrupting the endocrine system in humans, it's also making it difficult for the plants to be as nutrient dense as we expect them to be. So as far as what you can do for that, of course, the best option is to avoid it altogether if possible. Go for organic, local grown things that use much less chemicals in their process of growing the food. That's always the best option. And remember, in the first study, I said that it affects the cytochrome pathway. That pathway is actually what helps our body detox. That's the first step in the body's detoxification that begins to happen in the liver. So not only is this a toxin that has some pretty serious effects on the body, it also disables the enzyme that's necessary to catalyze for detoxification. So it sounds very bad. So not only once your body has it in there, it's very difficult to get rid of it, to get it out of there. So what you can do to kind of assist your body is take an enzyme supplement and also take activated charcoal, which will bind to anything toxic in your body and kind of draw it out, help you excrete it a little bit faster. And so if you have to go large scale agriculture that may have glyphosate in there, because it can't be washed out of the foods. If the plants are sprayed with it, so they uptake some of it regardless of whether they're susceptible to the pathway or not, whether or not they're glyphosate resistant, it is in their DNA. And they may not uptake it from the soil, but it's still in there, and it's something that you cannot wash off, unfortunately. So avoiding it whenever possible, assisting your body detox from it with activated charcoal, and supplementing with a multi-mineral supplement when possible are the best ways to kind of treat this. So like I said, there's a plethora of research on how devastating this can be to the human physiology, but these are the two that stuck out the most to me, was the fact that just by seeing that these agriculture workers were having issues with their pregnancy, and they found out that this disrupts the endocrine system, which is very important to a mother and developing baby. And then also that the plants that we're eating now may not be as nutrient dense when they're treated in this manner. So just something for you to be aware of if you're looking to clean up your diet and things like that. And always, try to avoid it, assist your body whenever possible. And I guess that'll be the end.